Okay. So sorry for the interruption, guys. Something happened. Now, as I was saying, so before starting, I've introduced I am a technology enthusiast, and currently I'm working at Secure 7, security consultant, and specialized in the VA PT part as well as this compliance management. Now, I have something to share that points of my own with the topic that zero trust cybersecurity or implementation and the benefits of zero trust architecture. Now, starting and on explaining about zero trust architecture and what are the recent benefits. I have to start by giving out the of our discussion and how we will proceed. So initially, we will be discussing about this history of trust and where that came, where when trust began or abuse of trust began. So this is one, and second, we will later compare the models and the different business architectures which allow the various kinds of risks and like how will this implementation of zero trust architecture remove those. So this is the basic methodology we'll be going through. Starting off for trust and abuse relation. So in any case, when there is too much of trust, there may be certain lapse or there may be which are unseen. So starting with history, so if you can see with the diagram, basically in a like let's say pre 2005 or 2010 era, the network connectivity was not so good and the technologies were still we also listen state or where what we can say in the growing market, the demography has changed and so has the just to connect to the workplace. Now, if you see like diagram also, I tried to represent an employee who is sitting in the office and doing some work. So my basic point here was to simply state that the home remote work location jobs, these were not that much possible or otherwise very much restricted to certain proficient employees only. Now coming to the part after 2000 or let's say some even more after that, as the broadband speeds grew and the technologies also blew apart the internet surface. So what happened was there was a growth seen in this remote like remote work habit of the employees as well as some other remote work contract jobs. Now, what I would like to focus your attention here is to the risks associated with this. Let's say if these risks in the case one and case two are not similar. Now, if the risks are not similar, definitely because of the architecture. In the first scenario, the risk was something kind of a more physical one, or let's say that the employees could have sneak past to the guards or something with respect to the operational securities and other stuff. And while work from home or any other remote locations, basically what happens is the employee or let's say whatever the contractor allowing the comments or is allowing the work to be done, he or she has certain expectations. And if the employee does not have certain organizational desktop or laptop or some devices, what happens is basically the mixing of personal and the professional space starts. Now, when there is an intermix of both these spaces, so it simply means like you can definitely control certain parts of the employee's life, or you can definitely control the certain figures, but the entire control is not there because the employee does not, the employer does not owns the device employee has or accessing. And second, there might be different loopholes in the security technologies and various missing patches on the operating system, which might have already pre-exposed the errors. So there are different kinds of scenarios with and different risks associated with those. But the point is, risk remains the same, and it is across the environment for various architecture, whether it is now or let's say 10 or 20 years back. So, like my point, like it, especially when we say that different approaches and different risks. So, this is covered. Like, let's say, what are the types of risk? So, before going in, like, what the kind of risks this kind of uh, what we can see is this various kinds of risks which are repeated in the graph as I deployed. Now, the meaning is related and also attributed to the technical as well as human errors. So, human error, like in the previous example, I mentioned something about the security guard. For example, if let's say that employee has snuck past, or let's say not an employee and he's or she is posing as an employee of an internal organization and they have snuck past that security guard. So this is a part of physical security labs. Now, when we say and it can be happen, yes, definitely. For example, let's say you're an employee and your organization does not allow or does not permit the outside machines or the USB drives to be welcomed in the organization premises. So what happens is definitely are not allowed. But anyhow, if you can let someone who come with that particular USB drive, software or hardware, piece of hardware within the organization, that is also a technical as well as the human loss, because your device or the pen drive or whatever the thing you have may be infected and already malicious with the malicious intent. So this is the part where the human errors are attributed for. And now coming to the technical issues and other parts. So technical issues basically general environment or a general workstation environment. The main thing is the failure happens because of either the updates or interdependencies or some other like let's say unwanted business requirements and the what we can science and because see the deadlines force us to do something in a very short form, so errors and the vulnerabilities are like forced to happen there only. Now, coming to the another one type of risk is the business continuity risk. So, for business continuity risk is basically the part of a management perspective, because let's take an example of the current scenario. In the current scenario, the COVID situation, nobody could have ever guessed it, but yes, it was all part. Like most of the organizations are as of now dealing and working on the remote end. The one major purpose is to stay safe and we are to like care for our health. Now if the organizations would not have developed their architecture and their informational policies as per the this particular method, now they could have been chances where the employees are still working from the office premises and there were no facilities provided by the employer. This was just an example. There might be different risks and there might be different calamities. So it is for the business and the management requirement that they plan in future well ahead of any such kind of a disaster. These actually they have certain kind of steps to go ahead. Now, to the other kinds of risk, basically, I explained scenario where you might enter your office premises using your own like laptops or USBs. Now, for that, I would like to say another example. Like there is a let's say you have your Android as well as your iOS devices. So when you are having an Android and iOS device, you will be simply connecting it to the workspace, but this is also a security drawback that you are allowed to connect your personal devices within the professional environment and without any authentication and this authorization perspective of, from the admin security. So these were a couple of like major risks, and yeah, we will be discussing how this zero trust will be eliminating these. Now going ahead, so yeah, one more major thing, like before going ahead, I like to clarify certain things, that is the differences in the terminology. So most of the times what happens is cybersecurity and information security are used like in synonymous for each other. So if you are using both these words for like replacing each other, there is a slight difference. Like this for cybersecurity is basically more focused towards the malicious intent and the attacks which are happening towards the applications. It may be on the mobile or it may be on the web, but applications, networks, and other like attack surfaces. But information security is majorly, let's say, it is an overall part of the security, which not only deals with this cyber security elements as well as also the principal core, that is the CIA. So those principles basically govern the information security part. So for example, if you are implementing any kind of a new technology, you will be going through those only, and this is covered by the informational security part. Now, operational security and endpoint user are the two different topics again, because what happens is, like as I mentioned, if you're using your organization provided desktops or laptops or any other devices, that might be, or that actually that should be covered with the part where the MDM or any kind of endpoint security is present, because users may knowingly or unknowingly get infected by clicking on some various kinds of links or installing some products. So yeah, they should be installed laptops so that they can be protected. And whereas the operational security is concerned, operational security is basically what we can say is the continuous process on the cycle, which governs like various parts, or which concludes and which merges all things. For example, if particular department needs something from another department and it is in certain labs, so this will all automatically come in under this operational security. Okay. Now moving on to the two other most major kind of terms which are most commonly used are architecture reviews and reviews. So architecture reviews basically, let's say if you are having a deployment of your internet or your network for your organization, there are certain things to be kept in mind. For example, there must be enough ease of access model, and the user should be getting enough security. So that all depends on the architecture what you have implied. Now, when I say the architecture is a major thing, so it should be reviewed, like how so it can be quarterly, annually, or like it may be more than that, but depending on the needs of the organization. Because once the architecture is set, there is no need to actually review and again. But once it is like you need or you think that it is actually required, then you can take a review of it. So coming to the disaster recovery policies, so as I mentioned, like there are certain things. For example, you need to cover in the policies. For example, uh, the policy should clearly state that how the business should be going ahead in case of such and such calamity. Second, the policy should state that the user's data and the privacy should be secured, even if they are not on the premises and are using some cloud services. So these kind of practices, what they ensure is like they are well documented process, and if your organization has those, so it will be your what we can say the implementer, as well as the admin or the even the employees to follow those along. Now jumping with the example, like as I just explained, like these are the major risks. So before going to the zero trust architecture, uh, like for zero trust, again you will implement every technology. So that is what is this slide like states. So basically you cannot depend on any single technology that this will happen. So this we have as a protection measure. For example, if you only have a firewall, and in your firewall you are trying to say that this will protect us from the DDoS, and this will protect us from the malicious attacks and also the malware propagation, so something like that. Now the problem is the firewall can very well prevent you from this, but it is not guaranteed. So this is the other technologies come in part. Now when these technologies are together in place and are working in a synchronous manner, they will provide you the this zero trust architecture. So yeah, okay. So this is a example of insecure infrastructure. So my point here is, like if your organization is a small or a mid-level organization, then your setup is something like this, where your switch is configured with the internet, and you are directly accessing these workstations and the file servers, like without any security and the endpoint protection or any even segmentation as well. So what happens generally in these kinds of cases is, like if you have direct to internet access and you are not using anything for restriction, so you can be exposed and your data might be leaked. And if your data is leaked, then it may be the case of, for governments, generally what happens is the espionage case. There may be different cases for the different organization, but yeah, there are certain cases, but definitely attack will happen, and it will not only expose the users, internal users, but also the data of the client and the whatever the business your company is into. So this is mostly from the insecurities which are there in the infra. So this is mostly about that. Now, coming to the case studies, because this, as you might remember, I'll be discussing about this in future. Now, when I say about small and big scale like organizations, what about the large scale organizations which are also facing some attacks? So actually, there is no one which is very, let's say, proved like they do not have a certain kind of risk or something like that. So uh, there are major concerns for bigger organizations as well, and those enterprises are very well affected by these kind of risk also. So I'll be discussing a few of the major case studies that happened. So basically, the British Airways is a very big industrial player in the aviation market, and British Airways got hacked recently in 2018. And what was the source was basically they didn't perform enough code reviews and the application security. So even if they could have simply gone through the normal VA and the QA part, there might have been some flags which were not incorporated. So what the core reason, which according to them, they disclosed in the media, was like there was the code or the, let's say, credential which were present in the source code, which exposed the database to the attackers, and so that they just blew apart the data of British Airways. Now this was very big and this could have been stopped, but unfortunately, they, even though they had a certain kind of a SOC and the other security implementation, they forgot, or they what can be said as, they basically didn't ignore, sorry, they ignored the part where they had to update the code, or they had to change the security settings. So again, another part is the Equifax. So Equifax is also struck by this kind of vulnerability in 2017, I believe. And this, in 2017, what happened was Equifax also was reported by some like, I think it was some of the researchers and their employees, that this particular vulnerability exists, and they didn't care to update and like implement the patch which was released by the OEM. So what happened was Equifax was hacked, and the attackers were having the database of the Equifax. So the vulnerability behind the Equifax was the Apache Struts vulnerability. So basically, the attackers were able to get that hold of the data, and they were also able to get control with the system, that is the internal system as we speak. Now, discussing about the Facebook and Adobe, so they are also the pretty big names, but they have slightly different, like what we can say, the scenario as compared to the first, because British Airways was majorly because of the insecure code practice, and Equifax was majorly because of the insufficient or non-timely behavior of the team to update the patches. But for Facebook and Adobe, it was basically the time or the deadlines which I described earlier, that had to release the product or the service in such and such times. So if you remember, Facebook has a view as feature. So initially, when Facebook launched that view as feature, it was vulnerable, and when the security researchers were got to know that this particular feature can be used for attacking and getting a hold of some malicious activity and the data. Now what they did was, the vulnerability was basically like the view as feature generated some token, and it was not getting revoked. So when we say not getting revoked, it is another bad practice, that temporary tokens which are generated are not revoked, and the attackers use them for exploiting further. And now the Adobe thing. Adobe is basically, we are very well aware of Adobe's region. It is a PDF viewer, and the other services are also limited with the PDF. So Adobe was basically an offline product, but they were moving into the product lineup of cloud-based service architecture. So when they were moving to the service-based infrastructure, they released the project without any kind of like detailed security assessment, and they were again hit by another vulnerability, which attackers disclosed, but only to the Adobe. But Adobe in recent years said that it was basically due to the time lapse and the deadline which we were following, and the security measures were not taken very seriously. So from these big four cases, what we can see is, even if you're a small company or even you're a multinational organization or a very big enterprise, the security impacts are very huge, and the only thing you lose is not only the data but also reputation. So it is also advised to implement any kind of security architecture where your organization is weak or where you think that this may affect badly. Okay, so coming to the next point, uh, yeah. Now, I have talked a lot about the history and what all things are there in the insecure organizations and how they can be removed. Now, let's talk about the zero trust architecture. So, what is zero trust architecture? Basically, when we have seen multiple diagrams and multiple case studies, so uh, whenever these architecture is made, there are multiple technologies which are in synchronous with each other. Now, when I mean in general implementation, which I showed you earlier, there is a simple switch and there was multiple endpoints with the different categories and the different kinds of users, which poses a plethora of risks. But what happens in the cloud-based architecture? There are multiple data centers, clouds, and there are multiple hybrid and as well as the private like setups which are done over the clouds. So point is, when you are having a zero trust architecture implementation, your best thing an organization can do is implement this and can have access to an overall like what the thing is going in, overall analytics of their organization. Like you will have more visibility and you will have more stringent controls, and this is best thing is segmentation. Like your users will be segmented and the networks are already segmented, so that they are not able to access any kind of unwanted file which the organization's rule does not permit. So also it should be noted that no single thing or the single technology or single product cannot be ever said as a foolproof measure, because anywhere in the future the security might be changed and they might be attacked. So what we can do is add like a second layer or another third layer or fourth layer. There is also a concept, if you can check it, note it down, is as a defense or concept, like which basically explains, like if you have multiple layers of security, then you might be still prevented even though you have faced an attack, but there certain things can be protected. So it's always a good practice to have that defense in depth attack. And yeah, now coming to next thing, so this is the main like what we can say architecture. So as I mentioned, there are multiple risks, applications, devices, and the system. So what zero trust architecture gives to the organization is an ability to view and what we can say monitor the network and trust. So what is the goal for it? To verify the identity. And when we say verifying identity, is basically implying that every user session will be implicated and verified. And similarly for every device type. In device, we generally term it as asset. Like for any organizational asset, we need to maintain an inventory. So if this identification verification process matches that device, then they should be allowed in this, then otherwise it should not, it should be not. So what is the need of this architecture? So if you take an example of that same Android and iOS, so these are the devices which anyone as of now have. So basically, when we are saying anyone has these kind of devices, so it will simply connect to the audience, and it will also connect to the internet using that organizations. But organizations a network and the admin and employer does not want that. So what they can do is they can put a proxy in between, or they can simply say that they have implemented the MDM. So and again another technology term, that is mobile device management. So when we say you have implemented these features, so on this process or this device or this user won't be able to identify itself or process the data which is not allowed. So basically, when we have an identification process, like these things should be verified and provided with the access control list they have implemented over the organization. But once and only once they are like gone ahead and their processing is done and everything is passed, then only they should be allowed to access it. Otherwise, they should be removed. So in name also it is suggested that zero trust architecture. Basically, when you trust nobody in your architecture and nothing in the devices as well. So you have a term zero trust architecture that is should be there only. So coming to the point, like what is the like what we can say how it should be implemented and how the risks are revoked from that. So if you see, I have mentioned couple of points like I was discussing about MDM. So similar to MDM, there are multiple other technologies. For example, SIEM, IAM, PAM, DLP, endpoint security, and etc. So these are not simply the terms, these are actually the biggest technologies on the information security point of view. And they what they do is they are some are log centric, some are packet centric, and some basically allow you to monitor the network, whereas some provide you the granular access in the access control list. Now, when we say what is the use of this logging, providing granular access or segmenting the network or providing an endpoint security, then again that part of zero trust infrastructure comes where there is nothing to be trusted and the whole infrastructure is considered as like weak. So when we say like if the whole infrastructure is weak, then we can do. So here is how to implement it. Now you can implement all the technologies which we discussed, and if you or if your organization has more requirements, you can very well go ahead and employ those. For a majority of small to mid-level organization, this will be suffice. And apart from that, you need to have a centralized Active Directory infrastructure to monitor the usage of and the user creations. Now, apart from that, once you have the Active Directory, you will be having a control over the policies which you will be implemented across the environment which you will be having. And the last thing which is mandatory is providing the access. For example, if you are having an access, then like if you are having some guest and you provided access, so what happens is generally the guests or the employees which are not there as of now with your organization might still have that access, and because you have not revoked it. So when you have revoked that particular access, then it is very hard for an admin to actually find out who is using what data and what access is going there. So it is very easy to say that it is not implemented, but have your proxies correctly set up and the access is managed, like you are granting and revoking the access based on the certificates, then it should be no problem in detecting this asset is no longer in use, or this a particular device is not here in this organization, and their whole architecture and so and so. So basically, when you have this kind of implement, automatically your like these layers are increasing, and also your visibility, like you are able to see everything which is moving across your infrastructure. So this is part where it is implementation. Now coming to the results. So if you remember, I talked about the results which were let's say uh, how that insecure architecture could have been better, or how that mid-level organization could be more secure, or even those bigger organizations how they could have simply avoided those casualties. Now thing is, when you have your enough network visibility and your monitoring team is continuously monitoring your infrastructure, you are able to detect any kind of breach which is happening, and also perform some like regular code reviews and the audits of your organization's assets. So when you are already doing that, what happens is you gradually reduce the process and the operational cost of certain things from your security perspective. So let's say if you are into the development company, so you will be following if you will be following this SDLC model, then it is of great help, because in turn it will already provide you the enough security. Now, similar example is with the other organizations as well, but let's take an example like of those like cases which we discussed about, for example, British Airways. So if they could have done the code review once, and they would have very easily found out that the credential was or for the view as feature from Facebook, if there were no deadline issues and they were easily going to check the security issues, the Facebook researchers and the security engineers might have noticed that. So but again, this will have helped them to, like, let's say, not lose the data. And because generally in Facebook what happens is every in like every month or so we get the news that this data has been hacked or the user information has been leaked. So this is the like this will be the result if they will follow each and every step as a stringent measures. Because generally what happens, like in the operational security point of view, we in practical terms we skip or we try to skip certain parts, so that may come back to later haunt us from a impact perspective. So this is the like most of the common results which as per me are the most important. And coming to that architecture which I described you in the like earlier slides, so this is the one. Basic in their earlier architecture, and it was very simple and it was not even segmented, and everything was only for the one specific set of people. Now what like the basic thing what you can do, if you do not have enough capital to invest, and if you do not have enough time and resources to invest, you can think of a basic architecture which is something like this. Like you can segment your network according to the needs. For example, your web server is hosted in your organization or even in the cloud, you can segment the access to that server, and similar for the other workstation and the endpoints of the file server, so that they particularly have certain kind of restrictions. Now when you have configured those over there, now you can also add again you can also add the firewall as well as the routers policies. And if you are using a VPN, good like that is also a better part. Like you have an additional layer again that defense and depth policies. Like you might have to configure it and you might have to take some time, but it will obviously help you in securing your infrastructure. Now once you achieve at least this basic level of infrastructure, you can think of further expanding your implementation of zero trust architecture. But at least this should be the basic thing, or this should be at least the role model or the baseline model which should be followed in every organization. So with this, I think I am done from my side. I would like to ask, anything you would like to ask, I'd like to answer if anyone has anything.